When trying to save money on your electricity, the first thing many people tell you to do is turn off your games console. But how much could that actually save you? Hello and welcome back to the Cost of Living series, where I measure the power intake of all of my consoles and see where we can eliminate phantom power and, save a few pennies. This is all of course in the wake of the cost of electricity rising by about 21% at the beginning of October, which has led us all to try and save as much as possible. In the last video I covered all of the consoles I had in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th generations, and today I'll be checking out generations 6 and 7. So hello fellow gamers, and how much have I been paying keeping these things on standby? Alright, let's check out all of my 6th and 7th generation consoles and see what their real power draw is. I'll be measuring each of these consoles in their on and in use state, in standby and switched off, whatever's available for the system. And I'll be measuring everything in kilowatt hours so we can easily work out an estimated cost. If you are new to the series, I'd recommend checking it out from the beginning. You don't have to, of course, unless you own the consoles featured in those videos, but it will at least provide a bit of context. There are also plenty of different scenarios that we have to start taking into account as well from here on out. For one, many of the systems from these generations that I have, I've soft modded, so I can run the games from a hard drive or SD card of sorts. But since most people won't have done this, I've been a good boy and tested the systems loading the games as they were meant to be run, from the discs themselves. That should give us a more realistic measurement for our tests. But with that, let's make a start with the only 6th generation console that was released in the 20th century. That of course is the Dreamcast, which was released in Europe in October of '99. It was a huge jump from the previous generation, presenting players with super sharp graphics and super smooth gameplay. One look at Hydro Thunder on the N64 compared to the Dreamcast, and you'll see what I mean. But how much does it cost to run? Well, testing it out with Sonic Adventure 2 for an hour, it sucked up a whole 0.02 kilowatt hours of power. That equates to about 2/3 of a pence, and that's about twice as much as Sega's previous console, the Saturn. So a whole day of adventuring with Sonic and his friends will set you back just shy of 16.5 pence. And if you left it on continuously, it would cost nearly 60 quid in electricity every year. But leaving the system on all year round would be, well, a silly thing to do. So let's switch it off and see how much it will cost us when not in use at all. After checking it out, I'm happy to report that the Dreamcast, whilst switched off, seemingly draws absolutely nothing from the mains. Well, certainly there was nothing perceivable detected by my power meter while it was off. So it looks like the Dreamcast is one of those systems where unplugging it from the mains isn't going to make a difference to our bills. Nice job, Sega. I wonder if they'll keep this up with their next console. Ah, wait, never mind. Over a year later, in November 2000, we in Europe were graced with the PlayStation 2, which went on to become the best-selling console of its generation. Now, I suspect this was very likely due to it being the only system in the generation that natively supported DVD playback right out of the box. The graphical jump from the PS1 to the PS2 was huge as well, and, well, this is sadly reflected in its power draw too. Playing Gran Turismo 4, which I believe to be a game that really pushed the system, drew 0.028 kilowatt hours of power. This works out as nearly a penny an hour, and if you were to do one of those 24-hour endurance races, that would cost you just under 23 pence. Now all of this added up really makes the PS2 more costly to run than the Dreamcast, but is it still more costly when we turn the system off? And it's here where we have other things to consider when measuring the power draw of these systems. The PS2, for example, has a standby mode where the LED on the power button is lit up red, and it also has a power switch on the back, which effectively just switches it off. But are either of these power states still sipping away at our precious electricity? Well, in standby mode, the PS2 draws as little as 0.001 kilowatt hours, which, if left over the course of a year, would cost you just shy of 3 quid. However, with the switch on the back flicked off, the PS2 draws absolutely nothing at all, just like the Dreamcast. Now, back in the PS2's heyday, it may have been advantageous to keep it in its standby mode since, in many homes, it doubled up as a pretty respectable DVD player as well. In standby, you could switch it on using the official remote and carry on either with your movie or your game without ever having to get off your ass. However, today, 22 years after it arrived in our shores, there's less of a need for that. Just switch it off at the back when you're done playing, and you're golden. A year and a half later, in March of 2002, a new contender entered the ring, Microsoft's Xbox. Now, Microsoft basically built the Xbox up just like a PC, which probably attracted plenty of attention from those who would have otherwise have joined the PC master race. But if it's practically based on a PC, wouldn't that mean it would draw a lot more power than its competitors? Well, I won't lie to you. Yeah, it does. Playing Halo 2 sucked up a whopping 0.063 kilowatt hours of power. That's over 2 pence per hour to run, which is shocking at this stage since no console until now had even broken the 1 pence barrier yet, let alone 2. Adding to that, a 24-hour Halo 2 marathon would set you back over 50 pence in power from the system alone. And you know, I pray to God you're not planning on starting an authentic Halo 2 LAN party anytime soon, because that will quickly add up. So, that is quite a jump from the other consoles in this generation so far. Is it the same story though, when the Xbox is off? Well, not exactly. I mean, when the Xbox is off, it draws 0.001 kilowatt hours, which is another £3 a year it's costing us doing sweet Fanny Adams. But that's far less than I would have expected. However, it's still not the same as what the PS2 and the Dreamcast offers, where both can be turned off entirely. Now, as far as I know, the Xbox today doesn't offer any benefits while it's switched off, so I'd recommend just unplugging this one when you're not using it. £3 over the course of a year isn't much, but it all adds up. The last entry in the 6th generation was Nintendo's GameCube, arriving here just 2 months after the Xbox. It didn't fare very well in this generation, selling less than even the N64 before it. But time has been kind to it, as people are rediscovering its hidden gems decades later. I've been testing this with Smash Bros. Melee though, which absolutely isn't a hidden gem at all, running through its adventure mode. I figured this would be a good way to test it, seeing as so many different levels and assets are loaded in, which might make the GameCube draw more power. The end result was 0.022 kilowatt hours, which works out as 3/4 of a pence per hour. That means a 24-hour Smash Fest could set you back just shy of 18 pence. That's definitely cheaper than the competitors that beat it that generation. The GameCube has one little trick up its sleeve, and that comes into play when it's switched off. The GameCube draws nothing from the mains when it's switched off, matching the PS2 and the Dreamcast in the same power states, so you needn't have to turn it off at the wall to try and save on electricity. Now, what I find strange is that the 6th generation is simultaneously the most expensive and the cheapest generation so far. It costs the most to run the consoles, yet is the cheapest when switched off. I wonder if this is a turning point where the big names are finally starting to be a bit more power conscious. Well, we're about to find out by measuring the Wii. This original model came out at the tail end of 2006, complete with GameCube compatibility. Now, this will be an interesting one to check because apparently it's not much more powerful than a GameCube itself. So let's see how much it costs to run. In a similar vein to the GameCube, I tested the Wii with Smash Bros. Brawl's Subspace Emissary mode to make it load many different assets to try and make it draw more power, but the result was actually very surprising. The Wii drew 0.019 kilowatt hours when running that game, costing nearly 2/3 of a pence per hour, which is just shy of what we measured on the GameCube itself. Another 24-hour Smash Fest on this will cost a measly 15.5 pence as well. That's pretty impressive to say the least. But of course, we want to know what it's costing us while switched off, and the Wii complicates matters by giving us a couple of different standby options. One indicated by an orange light on the power button, and another displaying a red light instead. The orange light means it's still connected to Wii Connect 24, so you can still receive messages and news and weather updates, that sort of thing, whereas the red light means it's not connected. Each of these standby modes will cost you about 30 quid and 3 quid a year respectively. Either way, I'd straight up recommend just turning it off at the wall anyway when you're done with it. I can't imagine a single person today using their Wii for messaging and for news and weather alerts, and you may as well save yourself that 3 quid per year than keep it in its lower power standby mode anyway. Next up is the very first HDMI console I've covered in this series, the PlayStation 3. I have the slim model set up here, which originally came out around September 2009. It's quieter than the original model, and apparently has a decreased power draw than the original too. Now we'll have to find out what the power draw of the original model is another time, but let's check out how much this slim model is pulling. Gran Turismo 6 was the game of choice for this test, as it really pushed the system at the time, and it came out so late in its life cycle, the PS4 was already on store shelves. Whilst running through a championship for an hour, the PS3 Slim drew 0.08 kilowatt hours, which works out as 2 3/4 pence per hour. And one of those 24-hour endurance races will set you back about 65 pence. That is by far the highest power draw we've seen of any game system so far. 3 times as much as its predecessor, in fact. Oh, if this one's meant to be cheaper to run, I'd hate to see what the original one's drawing. Oof. Well, now I'm dreading to see how much it's costing me while it's switched off. And, oh, this is a pleasant surprise. Absolutely nothing is being pulled from the mains in standby. Well, that's excellent. So you could just leave this plugged in without having to worry about a thing, right? Well, not quite. If you're logged in with an account and have automatic updates enabled, the PS3 will still turn itself on once a day to sync trophies and save data and download any updates. Having said that, PS3 game and system updates have been very few and far between these days, so every day it's going to briefly check, find nothing, and turn itself off again. It'll be very quick. Nowadays, it's really only useful for syncing trophies and save games, because if a new system update came out, you would know the next time you tried to log in, because you'd no longer be able to connect to PSN. So you have the choice. If you're playing your PS3 fairly often, you might want to keep the automatic updates on. But if you're not, you might be better off disabling it and just running a manual sync of your latest game before shutting down the system. The last system we're looking at today is Microsoft's Xbox 360 Slim. The release of the original 360 began the 7th generation of consoles at quite the cost to Microsoft, as we all know. But I have here their 2010 model. So what does a working 360 cost us to play on? I decided to test this one with Skyrim, which seemed a good choice as it brings in loads of assets and would be quite a push for the system. And I think that worked quite well, because we got a staggering 0.074 kilowatt hours out of it. That's 2.5 pence per hour to play Skyrim on an Xbox 360. Now that's not as bad as the PS3 Slim, but it's still damn high compared to many of these systems. And if you decided to Fosdora across Tamriel's most northern province for a solid 24 hours, prepare to be charged over 60 pence for the privilege. That's almost enough for a sweet roll. Quite frankly, yeah, I could see myself doing that, to be honest. The 360 isn't all that surprising either when it's put into standby mode. It takes up 0.003 kilowatt hours of power while it's in standby. That's a little under £9 per year left sat there doing nothing. So it seems obvious, doesn't it? Turn it off at the wall and save yourself the £9 a year, right? Well, yes, but actually no. It totally depends. The thing is, Microsoft are still maintaining the 360 online store. You can still browse through, buy games, and download them. The 360 is also capable of downloading said games while in standby, presuming you have background downloads enabled, of course. This also includes any 360 games you've obtained through Games for Gold. This of course came to an end recently, we don't get 360 games through it anymore, but you might have amassed a large library of games through that, which you might download and play on a regular basis. Now, if you're in this camp where you're using your 360 often, then leaving it on standby might be the best option for you. However, I went with the alternative. I got myself a USB hard drive and downloaded all of my games onto that instead. That way, I've got my entire 360 library locally and I've got no need to leave it on standby anymore. If I get myself a new digital 360 game, I may as well just play a game on it until it's finished downloading, at which point I can happily turn it off at the mains. Alright, so by making all the changes I've suggested, given how I've had these consoles set up all this time, I stand to save about £18 per year on my electricity bills by selectively unplugging some of them. Now this may be a little higher since I'm turning off automatic updates on my PS3 as well. Now I know that's not a lot, but that's just this bunch of consoles. We've got many more that I need to check out to see where else we can save a few more pennies. If you want to see how those turn out, perhaps to help out with your own rising bills, feel free to subscribe. But with that, I'm going to head off because I've got a little bit of rearranging in the background here in order to benefit from all these cost savings. But thanks so much for watching. Please leave a like if you liked the video. I'll catch you all next time.